Hello, welcome to the Dream Stories channel. We are glad to see you on our next shocking story. Enjoy watching. For the umpteenth time, Valentin saw the older boys chasing the little boy. The boy cried and hid, but returned to his place in front of the store and stood there with his hand outstretched. He had seen him for months, but had never seen them before. This time he decided to interfere. Get lost. Few people in the beggar circles knew Valentine. He was always alone and never clung to anyone. If there was any misunderstanding, he would quickly solve it with his fists. Valentine had heavy fists, and he could fight pretty good too, from the days when he was a common man. They scattered all over the place, but a boy of about 6, no more, looked up at him, frightened. "Don't be afraid. What's your name?" "No name." "Wow, you're mean. Who are you with? Why aren't they sticking up for you?" All the homeless beggars were clans. Worked for the clan, traveled with the clan. And they stood up for their own, of course. Here you're alone, no protection. No one to intercede. I ran away. You ran away. So that's it. Then, why don't you turn yourself in? They'll put you in an orphanage and you'll live clean and well fed. I don't want to go to an orphanage. The boy sniffed his nose. I need to find my kin. Are you sure you have relatives? I do. The child pressed his lips together stubbornly. Valentine looked at him and realized that his elders would beat him, that they would never let him live. "What am I supposed to do with you? Are you hungry?" "Very hungry. Come on, I'll feed you." He headed for his lair, didn't even look to see if the boy was following him or not. If he follows him, fine, but if he doesn't follow him, don't follow him. The boy stared after Valentine for a moment, then hurtled after him. Not only was he very hungry, but the cold made his nose sting. In general, Jenka had always lived on the street. No, he knew for a fact that he had once been domesticated. But for as long as he could remember, he had been homeless. He was in a large company of similar beggars, with several other children. Jenka had a disobedient character, for which he was often punished by adults. He had one dream and one secret. A dream to find his relatives. He was sure that someday he would find them, but his secret? He had never told anyone about his secret. The only one he knew was a homeless woman with whom he had a very warm relationship, but she had frozen to death drunk 3 months before. Then Jenka was left with no protection at all and decided to flee to this town. He arrived in a freight car, nearly freezing to death. Then he spent the day warming up at the station, until he was expelled by a cleaning lady. The city turned out to be not only unfriendly, but also overcrowded with homeless people. Of course, he managed to beg for a piece of bread, but with great difficulty. He had seen this big man too, and once asked a legless man who played the harmonica at the market about him. He told him it was Valentine, a lonely homeless man, whom even other homeless people were afraid to approach. Scary man, I tell you. If you piss him off, he can lay a dozen and not get tired. But he don't mess with nobody. He's a loner. He doesn't need anybody. Perhaps something bad happened in his life. Now Jenka was walking beside him and realized that he was so tired, so cold, that he did not care whether he was scary or not. They came to some cave. Valentine tossed aside the boxes that were in the cave. "What are you standing there for? Get in." And Jenka climbed up. What else could he do? It was warm there, and also he was fed, and the boy fell asleep right away, as he was in his overcoat. Somehow, now that the big man was there, he wasn't scared at all. Quiet as a matter of fact. Valentine shook his head, took a large jacket from behind the pipe, shook it, and covered the child. Valentine and Jenka had been together for a week. Valentine was amazed at how inquisitive, quick-witted, and talkative Jenka was. He could simply talk without ceasing, as if he had kept silent for many years, and now he wanted to tell everything. Valentine understood that this little Jenka was like a breath of air to him. About 7 years ago, Valentine had found himself on the street precisely because he had lost his child. He only blamed himself for the fact that his wife Svetlana and Oksana were no longer in this world. His wife told him for a long time that there was something wrong with the car, but he did not have time. He took her car for a ride and everything seemed fine. He told Svetka that she was making it up so he could order a cab, and the next day they crashed. No one understood what really happened. The car just went off the road. There were several examinations, but all the technical specifications were normal and the brakes and wheels were fine. Anyway, it didn't matter anymore. The important thing was that he had lost his girls. Valentine turned around sharply. "Jenka, let's run." And they ran. There was a new mayor in town. They heard about it from the advertising posters. And this new mayor promised that in a month, there would be not a single homeless person in the city. Where he would take them, the mayor didn't say, and they didn't want to find out. They first ran, then jumped on a train. When they got off, they just walked down some path. Some village could be seen ahead, but it didn't add to their joy. There was no chance that people would be kind to them. And there was nowhere to hide in the village, nowhere to keep warm. It was not a city. Valentine could feel that his feet and hands were no longer freezing cold. He looked at Jenka, who held on firmly, but his nose was already quite blue. "Hey man, are you crazy in such a cold and with a child? Hurry up and come in." Valentine turned around. There was a woman standing at the gate of a house, about 30 years old, maybe a little less, and in her eyes the night. You can have such impenetrable eyes in which there is only longing and pain. "Thank you, my hostess. We won't bother you." The boys freezing. They entered the house and stood in a corner. "I'll make you some tea and you can have some." Valentine took off his overcoat and pulled off Jenka's jacket. Jenka did not finish his tea. He dried off right at the table. "You put the boy here on the sofa." Valentine was embarrassed. "So, we're not very clean, we'll make a mess here." "It's okay, I'll wash it." Reload. On the wall was a portrait of the man with a woman and a little girl about 2 years old, and he was struck by the resemblance of the girl to Jenka. The devil knows, maybe Jenka was related to her. "You get some rest now. I have to go to work, I have an evening milking." The woman calmly left them, strangers in her house, and went away. Valentine dozed off, crouched on the sofa beside the boy. He was awakened by a knock on the door, his landlady returning from work. "Go back to sleep. Now we are going to have dinner." Jenka was still asleep, and Valentine sat down at the table. He got a good look at the woman only now. She was beautiful, but very sad. Though the man thought he understood everything. She was no longer there, and if there were no goals or children's things in the house, she was probably dead too, which was why her eyes were so intense. "My name is Valentine. And I'm Tamara. Excuse me for asking, but I saw a portrait of her there." The woman twitched as if she'd been struck. Then she sat down. "That was my family. My husband left me and took my daughter, or he stole her when he realized I was filing for divorce. A week later he was found murdered. But my little girl was nowhere to be found. It had been almost 5 years. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Valentine was ready to kill himself for asking her questions, but he couldn't help himself. "The girl is yours, she looks so much like Jenka. If he wasn't a boy, I would have thought he was your child." Tamara looked up at him. There as if a question could be read. "Why are you hurting me more?" But she didn't have time to say anything. "And I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. I just don't tell anyone. It's much harder for girls." They turned around. Jenka was standing nearby, looking at Tamara very frightened. She turned pale, stood up slowly and muttered as if to herself. Our Sasha had a little burn above her elbow. She had caught it on the stove. Tears rolled out of Jenka's eyes. He or she rolled up his or her sleeve, and the burn mark appeared. Tamara jumped up and immediately collapsed on the floor. Valentine and Jenka rushed to her. Valentine lifted Tamara, carried her to the couch, and ran to get water, while Jenka simply held the woman's hand. At last Tamara came to her senses. Little girl, did I really find you?" Valentine looked at Tamara and at Jenka and wanted to cry so much. The man had to stay with Tamara longer. Tamara did not let Sasha leave her side even for a moment. On the first day, the bathhouse was heated. Valentine took a steam bath and showered. He received a set of underwear, which had been left by his ex-husband, and made him look like a man. Even the cops didn't think he was a common bum. To avoid eating food for nothing, he fixed everything he could get his hands on, at the same time learning the story of Tamara and Sasha's breakup. Tamara really wanted to divorce her husband. He beat her badly. It didn't do any more good. So, to punish Tamara, he decided to take his daughter with him for a while, so that she would feel it out and not try to move. But in the city, he had a conflict with some vagrants. Apparently, the husband was drunk at the time. That's how Sasha ended up with the bums. That was the police version, and Valentin was inclined to think that this was it. A week later, he started packing. "Thank you, ma'am, for the shelter, for the warmth. I won't bother you anymore. It's time to know your honor." Sasha, who now wore only dresses, grabbed his arm. "Where are you going?" Tamara also looked at him strangely. "How bad is it for you here?" Valentine looked embarrassed. "I don't want to get in the way. I'm a bum, I belong on the street." "Maybe that's enough, you're not a boy." "Enough of what?" Valentine didn't know why he was so embarrassed. He couldn't hide from Tamara's gaze, even though he averted his eyes and still felt her staring at him. "Stop running already." "I'm not running, I'm living." "You live. Hiding from yourself, punishing yourself, for what? Have you ever been to your grave? Do you even know where they are? Can you bring flowers?" Valentine shook his head stubbornly. He shook his head stubbornly, and shook his head. Valentine shook his head in surprise. "Stay, just like that." Tamara looked at him gravely, and Valentine suddenly realized that he wanted to stay. He wanted to be with this woman, he wanted to be near Sasha. But it's so scary to love someone and be afraid of losing them again. 3 years have passed. "Mom, Dad, I only got A's in school. Can you imagine? Not a single B." Valentine caught Sasha and took her in his arms. "Of course we do. And all because you are the smartest, the most beautiful, and my favorite." Sasha was unrecognizable. Gone painful thinness. Instead of short, messy hair, gorgeous curls gathered in a high ponytail. Valentine himself had changed. He was a handsome, broad-shouldered man with a kind gaze. Tamara laid the table and smiled. She realized just now how happy she was. In fact, she thought she would never be happy again in her life. She also had news she didn't even know how to voice. Valentine had just come home from work before Sasha. He worked as a driver. They sat down to dinner. Tamara cleared her throat. She did not know how to begin. "Sash, I want to ask you a question." "Yes, Mom." "Sashenka, how would you feel if you had a little brother or sister?" Valentin dropped his fork, and Sasha laughed. "Mom, that's great." Sasha jumped up from the table and rushed off somewhere. Valentin got up and walked over to his wife. "Tamara, is it true? I am not joking. I do not know what to say, I just want to cry." "With joy, I hope?" "Of course it is." He picked her up in his arms and spun her around the room. Then Sasha showed up and hung onto her foster daddy too. Squealing. Laughter. Tamara fooled her family a little. She asked for a little brother or sister, but gave birth to both at once. Sasha, when she found out about it, immediately said, "That's right, we should have the best and the most. That's why we had a brother and a sister at the same time." Thank you for your watching. See you next time.